Yeah, that's nail on the head, really. It's that the positive atmosphere is a creative atmosphere, because if people are feeling good about themselves and good about the session, then they feel they can throw in ideas and not worry if it doesn't work, because everything's going well anyway, and not worry about people's opinions. And then you get to the good ideas. You know, it may not be the first one or two, but they will come if everybody feels like they can throw their ideas in, which is what I as I said at the beginning, I'm very happy to keep throwing ideas in, and happy to keep being wrong. And part of the reason why I'm happy to keep being wrong is I want everyone else to know they can be wrong too. You know what I mean? Exactly. It's great if we throw ideas and they're wrong, because that means, we're fishing out the good from the bad. We're working out what works and what doesn't, and we're still throwing ideas in. So it's like I heard a description which I think sums me up a little bit more than I want to. But Churchill says success was stumbling from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm.
Formal introduction. Man who is virtually and digitally in the house, Mr. Don Morley. Wow, a big round of applause from me.
Thank you.
Everyone eventually watching. Now, I'm going to break one of my golden rules here, because I don't normally have a piece of paper with everything written down. But for you, I needed to, because...
Okay,
obviously, we got the Grammy Award-winning engineer, also a producer and mixer. Great array of credits from...
Thank you.
Obviously, Amy to Adele to flipping Grinderman.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, I know. I was listening to that this morning, actually. So I want to come to that, because that's a funny one to mix on face value. Compared to the more sort of thing, when you go like, let's get a really good mix.
Right.
Kind of a different aesthetic. So I want to talk about that in a bit. But also, sound design projects as well. Your synth collection.
Do a bit of that, yeah.
Your company, the Mix Consultancy, which I think is a fascinating idea. The room you're in now, which is obviously part of the Flint setup, which is your studio.
Flint barn, yep. Yeah.
And also, and this is where I want to start,
okay,
erstwhile academic as well.
Indeed. Yeah. Do a bit of that as well.
Yeah, principal, not just a senior lecturer, but principal, which means...
I don't know what that means.
What means you're the Don. Don the Don.
Right. Does it? Good.
Leeds College of Music.
Yes. It's an institution I'd sort of had an eye on for a while, and I don't know why. They got my attention. I think I like the way they partner with like Apple and Steinway, and they got a foot in the past and a foot in the future, and I kind of like the way they do things. And then so this job came up for tutor for the master's course in music production, and I'd been wanting to do something in education for quite a while. I don't know, I guess you feel a sort of urge to do it. And that came up, and I thought, well, that's kind of perfect, because I like the institution, and it's, it seems to be my sort of thing. So then I went for the interview and I got the job. So that was great. So I've been there for, I think it's 5 or 6 years I've been doing that. So it's not that major in terms of time, because it's the masters. So it's mostly, self-motivated work, and I'm just checking in on them and giving them a bit of direction and making sure they're going in the right way. So it's it tends to be every Monday in term time, right. I'll go up to Leeds and spend the day, working with the students and helping them out.
Right, because that's really, the whole MA thing is really interesting, because, obviously I've done a bit and still do a little bit, and mine was just through a hand injury, because I couldn't play for 6 months because I wrecked my tendons, and that's why I ended up doing it. Kind of liked it, so carried on when I could play again.
Yeah.
But most of my experience is on the undergrad, teaching them pop music.
Okay.
Which, obviously, when I started, if you wanted to go to uni, you just go to arts college, just so you could get a grant and actually just be in a band. Do as little work as possible. But that kind of whole thing's changed now, so you can go and study to be a bass guitarist, to be an engineer, to be a songwriter. And I've got a funny relationship with it, because I never had it, and I brought my experience of actually doing it into the academic thing. I actually changed quite a lot of things they were talking about, where it was, to be in pop music, you had to be like, really shit-hot guitarist. Whereas in reality, it's about working with people and being creative.
Yes. Yeah. It's not necessarily your technical ability that will get you ahead.
Yeah.
You know, it can get you through. I always think with that sort of thing, it can get you through a door.
Yeah.
But then what gets you, you know, to stick in the room to invite it back tomorrow, you know, is your creativity and as it was once referred to me as, are you a cool hang? You know, are you the sort of person that somebody wants to spend all day with? Because that's the gig, you know, it's long hours. Sometimes it can be a stressful environment if, you know, if things aren't going as well as they should or things like that. And you've got to be somebody that can be in the room and just, be a friendly person that's always willing to work and help and try something new, you know. So, and yeah, it's not the most technically advanced people that necessarily get all those gigs.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get the joyful connection of both, like yourself, you know, who's obviously a lovely person to work with, technically advanced. But that's not always the case. Yeah, you're right. The emphasis needs to shift perhaps a little bit onto the more social aspect of it.
Which is what
difficult to teach, though.
Oh, absolutely, because things you can teach, you know, even if it's not, you know, hey, textbook learning, this is your signal path. Okay, that's great. And that's for like undergrads, that's great. You know, who are pretty new to it and they've maybe been working in the box primarily and they've got their way of doing things where they just stick too many plugins on things and then the signal just kind of dissipates into like...
into
some
mush,
scooped out mush of... Well, why doesn't it sound like a record? Well, let's go back to the beginning. Your source sound is shit.
Yeah.
So let's start with that. So all of that kind of thing. But as you said, the social side, how to utilise your knowledge base but without relying on it as a sort of like, yeah, but I'm really technically proficient at, you know, X, Y, Z, you know, side chaining a compressor. But what might, or, you know, coming up, playing a riff in 7/8. But really what might be needed is someone to go along with the flow, to work with people, not be afraid to have their ideas shot down as well, because that's where a lot of people don't understand.
Yeah, being happy to be wrong. And that's actually the thing that I start out with when I'm starting a project with an artist is, you know, I lay it out that I'm almost impossible to offend. Like, so you can just say anything you like about any of my ideas. I'm happy. I'll just throw another one in. You know, ditch that. It's fine. I sort of see my job as to be having the ideas, you know, or to be part of one of the people who is having the ideas.
Yeah.
So, I'm not in the least bit precious about anything. Yeah, and I think that is also an important skill to learn, that it doesn't matter if someone doesn't like your idea, they still like you, and they may still like your future ideas. So, you know, you keep on plugging, you know, just keep on throwing them out there and you'll get there.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great way to say it. They may like your future ideas, so don't take it personal. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a position, you know, as a session musician, you know, like yourself, you're kind of expected to pitch up with, you know, but to be full of ideas, you know, that's what someone wants you to do. It's, not necessarily to be, you know, the amazing jazz player or anything like that, but just, you know, we need a bunch of ideas for this middle eight, what you got? Yeah,
and sort of get them down quickly. One of them are going to like, even they may even like a few. And occasionally they say to the person who's just played it, well, which one do you prefer? Which is rare, to be honest.
Yeah.
But let me take you back, because somewhere that used to seem to my old bands like it was like Abbey Road or Air, okay? Because we had our own studio in Birmingham where we did our early stuff, which we were very proud of.
Absolutely, I went there once.
And occasionally we'd dip into DEP International Studios.
Yeah,
owned by.
Which is where I started.
Is it still going?
It is now a car park.
Moseley Shoals is now a car park as well.
Yeah, and it's not even a nice car park. It's like a bit of waste ground with a guy in a plastic chair collecting fivers. It's like a horrible car park. That's a shame.
Oh dear. But that place to us, because it was owned by a band, you know, people generally think of like band studios, or a bit like the old Moseley Shoals studio, a bit knockabout, a bit run down, but it does the job. But obviously DEP was like a proper studio.
Yeah, it was nice. Yeah, and had an SSL at one point as well. While I was there.
How did you start there then? Because that was kind of the first sort of recognisable thing that people would go, oh yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that was my first paid job. Yeah, so it was a bit of a roundabout route, because I grew up roundabout where I am now in Buckinghamshire. So when I first looked for a job in the studio, I automatically went to London, because that's you know, half an hour away on the train. So I knocked on doors of studios for 3 days, just going around all the ones, you know, that I could find and saying, I work for nothing, I make good tea.
Yeah.
I didn't have much of a plan past that, but I thought maybe that would get me in somewhere. And it didn't work.
Yeah.
So I then went to Birmingham, so the next biggest city, and tried the same thing. And there was a place called the Music Station, which had an SSL and a Studio tape machine. I can't exactly remember where it was. It's gone. But yeah, they said, yeah, come in on Monday at 10. You can do some work experience. So I did work experience there for a while. It's probably actually in the end, it was only about 8-10 weeks or something like that. But obviously I didn't know where the end was coming at that point. I was just there trying to learn some stuff and see if I could be helpful. And it was just one room, and there was a guy who was the assistant stroke tech stroke studio manager stroke everything. So he didn't really get involved in the assisting. So I just kind of helped out. There was one guy who was engineering, producing an album in there called Simon Hanhart, and he was making the record, and I just tried to be as helpful as I could. But he was mates with a guy called Mike Exeter, who was the chief engineer at DEP. So Mike had come over and hang out a few times, and then when a job came up at DEP, Simon said to Mike, "Oh, you should hire Dom. Like, well, I'll miss having him around, but he needs a job, and yeah, you should give him a job." So yeah, so then I went to get an interview with Mike, and that's how that came about. So yeah, it was a sort of long route of knocking on doors and then signing on. It was back in the days where you could get away with that. Yeah. I was allowed out on a Thursday for an hour to go and sign on, and that gave me just enough money for peanut butter on toast for breakfast and lunch and a pot noodle for tea. Yeah, oh God, pretty mad.
I mean, that is the old school route, isn't it? I mean, I remember doing a gig with Paul Weller, and we were staying at a hotel in Solihull, which is where my parents had moved to from Merseyside. And right next to the hotel was the Dole office, which is where I used to go and sign on. So then I'm right next door, looking out my hotel window, which is overlooking the Dole office, thinking, turned out all right, you know. Yeah. But back then you could.
I come upstairs.
Yeah, come upstairs. But what was your interest in engineering then? I mean, did you do a formal thing? Because you know, pop music, of course, didn't exist, but the old like Tonmeister sort of way into stuff did.
Yeah, I mean, this was like 96, I guess, 95, 96, so there weren't many options. There was the Tonmeister course, I think there was Alchemy, there might have been one SAE building, you know, there wasn't a lot. So my plan was that I would do that if it was like, I'd give myself like 3 to 6 months. If I didn't get a job, then I'd go and apply for a course and see if that would be a good way of getting to know people, because I figured that was kind of the route, was getting to know people and getting in somewhere. But I sort of came by playing the bass as a teenager, and I played in band with mates, and I didn't really like the playing bit of it. I wasn't really into gigging, but I bought a 4-track and then an 8-track, and I loved that bit. So that was obviously going to be the route for me in music, was going to be more that kind of the making the records bit rather than the playing bit. So that's how that was the only experience I had that got me into the first studio, was which really was not enough to matter to anyone. It was simply being keen.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, on 2 points, the thing like, you know, started off as a bass player, played in bands with your mates, wasn't really into the playing bit, but loved music. Yeah. Doing the 4-track, 8-track thing. Because a lot of the producers and engineers I've spoken to so far in this season that I know, it's kind of the similar thing. Like, start off, love music, get in a band. Yeah, I love music, but this is a bit of a pain in the ass, all this sort of thing. But I really like this. Getting those sounds. I found my bit
that I like.
Yeah, getting those sounds together. But then also, what's interesting about what you just said is that little bit of experience of like home studio stuff, if you like.
Yeah.
Didn't really mean anything when you then hit Music Station and then DEP, because obviously it's like a whole other platform you're stepping upon.
Yeah. And really all that demonstrated was that I was interested in it, you know, but you know, I don't think if I hadn't have done that, I don't think that would have made a difference to me moving ahead, because I think people were just interested in somebody who was, you know, very keen to learn. And like the thing with the Music Station, it was a bit of luck really, but they took on a lot of people that would do work experience from Sandwell College, I guess it was, were doing some sort of pop music course or something. And those guys would turn up at 10 when the studio opened, and then they'd leave at 4 because that's when they left college, and they just saw their work experience as an extension of that. Whereas I stayed until they turned the alarms on, you know, at midnight, because I just wanted to be there. I was just like, I still remember the feeling of like the weekend before I was going in thinking, I cannot believe on Monday I'm going to spend the day in a recording studio, a proper recording studio. This is mental. I still remember that kind of rush. So that kind of that carried me over really, and people sort of, I guess, wanted me around because of that, that willingness to learn and that enthusiasm. That's way more important than knowing how an 8-track cassette machine worked,
Yeah, of course, because then it's, as you said, it's just like a whole different step up. It's a different signal processing. Everything just goes totally different. And obviously, you're not just doing it for your mates or doing it for yourself. It's like...
Exactly, you're doing it for people who are paying.
Who are paying good money.
Potentially UB40 or, those sort of people.
So obviously you came into that as like, then started assisting and then, at DEP.
Yep.
And then what was the first thing when that you kind of like, okay, Dom, you can engineer the whole thing, as opposed to, can you do this, can you do that? And you're learning on the job, but now you're actually, I'm doing the engineering.
Now you're doing it. Yeah, well, that's the advantage actually with a studio like DEP, which is not the kind of high-pressured London-based thing, is because it was a relatively small out of London studio, you got quite a range of artists. And actually, I think DEP was interesting in that you got a real range. So we would have, Tony Iommi used to come up and do some recordings there. Obviously, UB40 made their records there. I also worked with Bentley Rhythm Ace, who, a big kind of Birmingham band at the time. Yeah. And I did some recording with Steve Craddock as well on a track called Carnation.
The thing with Liam. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I recorded piano with him.
I don't know why we didn't do it at ours. We were in the middle of making something. Which is why we quite often used to nip into DEP to do B-sides when Brendan Lynch and Max Hayes were mixing something or...
That makes sense,
So we go, right, well, we're not going to sit there all day, let's go in there.
Yeah, good, yeah. So there were things like that, which are obviously people that were, at the top of their game. And also you got just people that wanted to make a demo of their band because, back in those days, you had to go to a studio to make a demo. It was even before I started, just before the ADATs came out. Yeah. So it had to be a 24-track tape machine to make anything, meaningful. Yeah. So because of that range, it meant, and also, to be fair, the guys that I worked with were great. It was a really good bunch of people in the studio. And Mike, who was, running the show, was very good. So within 6 months, I was engineering my first kind of local band demo session. They were obviously on a really cheap deal and told they got the new guy, but, it all worked out. I'm sure it sounded fairly shocking, but better than they would have got at home, I imagine. Yeah. So I had at least been doing it professionally for a few months and picked up a few things along the way and, had access to the gear and knew how it worked and things like that. So, it was quite quick. And then, I was at DEP for a couple of years and then I moved down to London and after a bit of moving about, got a job at Metropolis in Chiswick, which then meant I was bottom of the pile again and was just assisting for probably about 2.5, 3 years before I got my first engineering gig again, because I had to work my way up, so... But, you then end up on a slightly higher plane because you're working with Metropolis clients and that sort of becomes a bigger deal just because it's a more expensive place, so it ends up being a bigger investment of a project that ends up there. Yeah,
and also, there's quite, as you said, it's like a bigger sort of level of investment, etc. But there's also more traffic going through, isn't there? More bands, more producers.
It was 5 studios at the time, so 3 SSL rooms, a Neve and a Focusrite, or, then it changed to 4 SSL rooms and a Neve. But it was a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah. So then what was your first engineering thing then at Metropolis? Like I spent, you've had this isn't like the history of Dom, but it's just really interesting for people to see how these things flow. Particularly for you.
I think it was mixing a Craig David B-side. I think. And he is such a nice bloke.
Guy,
ridiculously nice. I was so pleased when he came back, and I think it's such a good sort of apocryphal story. It's kind of like he was a lovely guy, his career went okay, and then it dipped, and then as soon as he started coming back, everyone was like, let's work with Craig again. He's lovely. Everyone just wanted to, and he got a #1 album. It was just brilliant. But I was assisting somebody who was mixing his stuff, and I can't remember who it was. It might have been Steve Fitzmaurice or somebody like that, who was, one of the big pop mixers. And I was assisting them a lot. And obviously, obviously gave the impression I knew what I was doing to some extent. And then it was a B-side that they didn't have the budget for Steve. They got the studio on a cheap rate and me on an even cheaper one. And it was just like, Dom, do you want to mix a B-side? I'm like, yes. Absolutely. No question. And again, I was possibly not the most qualified person in the building at that point. There would have been other engineers in the building who had more experience than me. However, you know, we all got on, and I guess they figured I knew their vibe and what they were up to. So, you know, again, the thing where personality and being, you know, a guy that people want to hang out with can get you a long way.
Yeah, and also, yeah, absolutely. And it's also going back to, I think, not necessarily being the most qualified at doing something, but it's also like, oh, Don would be good for that because he's cool.
Yeah.
And also, you know, and also, I mean, you probably felt pressure mixing it.
Absolutely.
Of course, because you want it to be really good, but also they're thinking, as long as it's okay, we'll be fine. So
yeah, I wasn't thinking that.
No, exactly. So they're
like, they probably were, yeah.
Yeah, they'll be thinking, oh, it's
a B-side.
It's a B-side. We haven't thrown a load of money at it. It'll come back, it'll be fine. And they probably came back and went, well, that's really good. Hopefully.
Yeah, that's all right. Because I'm sure I got a bit more work out of them for that.
Yeah.
I got a few more days of other bits and bobs. So, yeah, I did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Must have been okay.
Yeah, exactly. So then how did it progress from there? Because obviously then you became a producer as well, alongside doing engineering and the mixing side.
Yeah, well, I guess I got a few bits of producing things that came from doing downtime with people. I spent a lot of time doing downtime. Metropolis were very good at that they'd allow you to do it, because some places were not so kind of keen to let their assistants bring bands in downtime.
Yeah.
But I think the advantage with Metropolis partly is it was so expensive as a studio, so posh, that these bands we were bringing in, we weren't taking money out of Metropolis's pocket here. They were never going to afford to get into Metropolis any other way. It was, you know, so that was fine. So I produced stuff with them. I think actually the first album I produced was a co-production with our mutual friend Chris Potter.
Oh, right, okay.
Because he was doing something basically with a guy called Cy Connolly. I don't know if you know that record. Yeah, you know Cy. So he was doing something with Cy, and Cy didn't really have a budget, so it was all like, you know, we need to get this as cheap as humanly possible. And you know, Chris was busy, and it's hard to work on stuff with no budget when stuff with budget comes in, obviously. Yeah. So he sort of enlisted me to help him out. I'd engineered for him in the past, and I think we even shared a studio at that point. So we were good friends anyway, and knew we came from a similar headspace in terms of sound and engineering and production. So he asked me to help out on that. I think I was just doing a little bit of help, and they ended up doing half of the work because that's just how the thing panned out, really. So that was my first foray into it, which was great because obviously Chris is brilliant and absolutely knows what he's doing. So I'd watched him do it a lot anyway. Yeah. But what I got to see doing that bit was the bit I'd never seen before, which was the pre-production. Because the pre-production never happens in the studios, it happens in rehearsal rooms, and I'd never actually seen that process with a band. So I got to sort of turn up and thinking, I know I'm supposed to be saying stuff here because I'm the producer as well, but I've got no idea what happened, so I'm just going to watch Chris and agree with him. Whenever he says something, I'll just say, yeah, definitely, yeah. But yeah, it was a good experience. Obviously learned a lot.
Yeah, talking about Chris for a second, what I really like about him is, like, obviously he's a brilliant engineer. Yeah. Used to be a bass player, still is occasionally.
Of course. But same all the best producers were.
Exactly.
Tony Visconti and Trevor Horn, also bass player, producer.
Yeah, and that bloke Youth as well. He's played occasionally plays bass, I've heard. Yeah. But it's really interesting because, like, Chris is one of those people who's like got the engineering side in the bag, but also has got the musical understanding that producer needs to bring. If we're talking like more sort of old school producer, not necessarily like the DJ beatmaker producer.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, of understanding, particularly the pre-production thing, going into a rehearsal room with an artist, whether it's a solo artist or a band, and it's really these things that they're playing in this rehearsal room, they've been working on for ages. This is their art, and it's like quite often I've seen producers who don't really understand the band or the creative side of thing. They're more just thinking, that won't be a hit, and they will rip something to pieces, and you can just see the passion and the love just drain out the artist. They're just
yeah.
Everything I've worked on, you just told me is shit.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. That you have to tread lightly while you're doing that sort of thing. But I often find, and perhaps I've just kind of hit it lucky quite a few times, but I often find when you bring up an area of a song that you think, you know, you're losing pace on, or there's something like that, often the band kind of know it as well. You know what I mean? And you're just kind of, you're saying the things that everybody else kind of either has mentioned before, or like half the band said, I told you. Yeah. You know? So, you know, I've been quite lucky. The people are normally been quite open to trying different things with the bits that I've flagged up as maybe this bit could be changed around. So yeah. But I know what you mean. It's often a difficult conversation to have, and it's the sort of thing where you're very much thinking on your feet with emotional intelligence when you're in the room and discussing these things, engaging reactions and seeing where people want to go, as well as the fact that often in that scenario, that's your first proper creative interaction with somebody. Yeah. So it's important that you get that right, so that everyone feels confident moving on with the rest of the record, that A, you're sympathetic to their ideas, B, that you're going to bring something to it as well. So there's a reason why, you know, you're in the room. You know, it's a high pressure moment for a producer to get that first kind of session right. But yeah, in that case, you know, I was lucky. I saw Chris do it, you know, because he's great at it. You know, he's done it a lot with some big people and knows how to do it. So yeah.
It's interesting what you said, bringing the emotional intelligence to it, because just sort of taking one step back, say that band and they kind of know that the middle eight's not right, or you know, it's, as you said, the track's losing pace. You know, it's getting a little bit at this point. Half of them probably know. The other half probably haven't even realised, but none of them are going to say it to each other, because then you get the inter-band dynamic of like, I can't say it. He wrote it. You know? And I really, you know, and it's like, and that's quite.
Which is where a producer comes is useful, because they can say it and they're actually employed to say it.
Yeah, exactly. And it's almost like, oh, great. Well, if the producer thinks so, whew. Yeah. Okay. And you know, obviously with younger bands, they kind of go with that, lean on the expertise anyway, which is, you know, is why they've been hired. But you know, as you said, even with larger artists, it's the same thing. They've just generally got a bit more of an ego behind their connection. You know. Yeah.
You just have to be a bit more gentler in your approach.
Yeah, definitely. So you also do a lot of mixing as well.
I do mixing, indeed. Yes,
a lot of that, and obviously we'll come to the mixed consultancy business, which is said is fascinating. But again, so taking, obviously, like you've done the assisting, you've done the engineering, you've done production, where you're kind of in generally at some point early in the process, sometimes right at the very beginning, pre-production. Whereas obviously when a lot of people are brought into mix, it's just like, here you go. You haven't been part of the emotional connections, the emotional intelligence that has got the project, and all the stresses and fights and euphoria and despair that has got it to this point. You know, even if it's just a single, you know, there's been all that journey which, you know, the listeners never see. Yeah. And obviously then you come in, Dom, will you mix this? And it's like, is that hard? I mean, obviously you're used to it now. Was that hard to plug into?
Yeah, it's just something that I think communication is the big thing there. That's something you really got to make sure that everyone is being very fluid with the communication, and you know by what you've tried to draw out of the band or the artist what it is they're aiming for. You know, so I'll often ask them to put together a Spotify playlist of what are you sonically aiming for. Tell me why each song's on there. So, you know, they might put a song up because they love the drum sound. If I don't know that's why that song's up, I might think they love the vocal sound, and then I'm going in the wrong direction. Yeah. So, you know, so things like that make a big difference, and getting their rough mix, that the last one they had, so you know roughly where they're feeling things should be. So those sort of things give you a bit of a head start into where a band or artist headspace is with a mix. And what that means really, I think, is the first one you deliver. I almost entirely mix remotely. You know, I'm in my studio, everyone else is wherever they are. So you're not having the conversation in the room with people. So the first mix you deliver, you want to be reasonably close to what they were thinking. I absolutely accept the process that is the first mix, and there will be many, you know, there will be revisions as we go through the conversation that you would normally have just had in the room. Yeah. So that's fine. But if you've got all this communication up front, then hopefully the first mix is reasonably close to where they are, which means everybody, you know, I'm not really thinking of it in terms of it's going to be quick to do. I'm thinking it in terms of they're going to be confident this is working, and we can carry on and everybody can be, communicative after that because they know we're going in the right direction. So, it's an interesting one. And it is one I do talk to students about it a lot, about that. Because I have students that obviously do that on the MA course and they're looking to be engineers. Some of them are producers of their own stuff. Some of them are solely want to be engineer producers. And I do lectures at universities up and down the country as well. And it's just really pressing home to people that you may be the first external creative input into this project, and it may have been running for years.
Yeah.
Like they might have been working on this album or EP for a very long time, and you weighed in, and in 48 hours' time it's finished because the mix is done.
Yeah.
And that's quite a heavy thing for a band or an artist to get their head around. So just be aware of it and be chilled about that. There's going to be some tensions, and there's going to be often a bit of going around the houses a little bit when you start out with them while they want to try a few things, while they're gaining confidence in you as someone that can deliver what they want. So, that's all cool. It's part of the process. And, I'm glad to be part of their creative process in that. I think it's an honor to be part of it. So it's cool.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's great. I love the way you said it as well. I'm particularly getting that playlist. Obviously, there's generally like, the board mix or the rough mix, and like, okay, this is where we're at. But to actually say, why is this track here? What is it about this track that really excites the solo artist or the band or whoever? So at least you were kind of going down the right route.
Exactly. And that's only out of experience because I didn't before, and I went really the wrong way on something, and it was like, oh, you actually hate the drum sound on that song. Okay.
Yeah, I really liked it. I thought I'd keep it, yeah.
Yeah.
And they were probably thinking, oh, we'll give it to someone who's professional to mix it because they'll make it sound great. And you're like, oh, you don't like that?
Yeah.
Shit,
yeah.
Back to the drawing board. But of course, it's kind of changed a bit now as well because obviously DAWs are amazing, but the huge amount of like hidden, overwhelming amount of information that is in a mix that needs to be got rid. It's like in a session that needs to be ignored, particularly with playlists as well. There might be, you think, there's 7 guitar channels. They probably put the playlist 1 is the one they want me to mix.
Absolutely.
But it's like, oh no, it was like the middle 8 on playlist 16, which is hidden 15 playlists.
That's their fault. And that's where it comes down to the communication as well, is when you're telling them what you need to have delivered, Yeah. And so, I just say, give me the audio tracks from bar 1, beat 1. Yeah. Then I'll drop it in Pro Tools. And if I hit play, I should basically get the things that I'm looking to mix. So, people are getting better at that. I think people are more used to knowing that that's the score and that's how you deliver to a mixer. But back in the beginning of the DAW mixing, sort of remote mixing thing, it was a little bit Wild West and you didn't know what you were getting. And it was a bit crazy. But I haven't had many mad ones like that for a while. So that's good.
Wicked. So why did you set up the business, the mix consultancy?
There's a few reasons really. It sort of stemmed, one of the inspirations was I was obviously, doing this tutoring of these MA guys and really loving how well they were progressing from what we were doing. And then it's a 12-month course, so they'll be with me for a year, and the other guys, the other people at the institution. And then you realise that when they leave, it's almost like stepping off a cliff edge because they're getting all this support and all this help, and then it's like you're on your own. Yeah, work it out from here. Because when I was obviously young, obviously I'm still young, but 20 years younger. There were a lot more studios kicking around. There were a lot more opportunities for somebody to leave a college and then go and get a job making tea somewhere and still have people around them that could mentor them and learn how to do their job. And nowadays, these people are generally leaving education and going out on their own and starting up. And that's tough. So I sort of had in my mind, I wonder if there's a way I could help bridge that gap for people so they could access something on an ad hoc sort of basis. But obviously it's got to be something slightly professional in a business, because I simply don't have time to tell everybody, just drop me an email whenever you want, I'll help you out, because I can't. Then that's all I'll be doing is just working for nothing, helping people out. So you have to kind of make it a business to make it something you can dedicate time to. And the reason why I chose the format of upload your mix, I'll listen through, give it a load of notes, explain where it can be better is there's two reasons. One is critical listening is the thing that you can't learn from a YouTube video. You know, you can learn everything else. You can learn how to fix anything from a YouTube video. There'll be an answer. But if you don't know what needs fixing, then you're lost.
Yeah.
You just know your mix doesn't sound as good as you want it to. You don't know why. So I think the way I do it actually teaches critical listening, because I'm saying, you know, with perhaps 20 years more experience on doing it to the people that are uploading their mixes, here's some things I've heard that maybe you haven't heard. Here's a few ideas on how to fix them, but this is how to do it. And these are the problems that you're hearing. And I do hear people that use it a lot. There's a few clients that use it a lot, or somebody will put a whole album through, you know, we'll do a mix and then we'll do another one. And their skills get better really quickly. It's really nice to see that it works. But the other inspiration was actually a session I did where I was assisting Max Hayes, who you know.
Right, yeah.
And it was a project which I probably shouldn't name, but there were 3 studios running, mixing a big band's back catalogue where it was like all of their old demos and everything over a few decades. And it was just digitizing it all, getting it all off tape into Pro Tools, and doing a rough mix of every single one as we did, so that there was some sort of record that people could just listen to.
Yeah.
And it was 3 engineers who were working, and Chris was overseeing the whole project, who's obviously a great mix engineer himself anyway, but he was just overseeing the project. And then it was that kind of odd thing where I had the fortune that Max got ill. So he was off for like 3 days. And so Chris sort of decided he'd sort of fell in, but as I was assisting Max, and I was quite an advanced assistant at that point, I was doing a bit of engineering and bits with him. He said, look, Don, why don't you just get these rough mixes going, and I'll come down and just, you know, tidy them up a bit and send them off. And for me, it was incredible, because what I got to do was do the best I could. And then somebody with 20 years experience on me came and did a few moves, and I was like, you know, was he completely over his shoulder for this? Like, what's he doing that's making it so much better than it was 10 minutes ago? And I learned so much from watching him, you know, learning from his critical listening. And I would, you know, from then I sort of learned how good a process that was. So quite often I would, if I was doing a mix, I'd play it to him or another engineer that I was friendly with and say, can you listen to like 2 minutes of this and name 3 things you'd change? And then from that, I would go, those are the things I haven't heard in that mix, and that got me better at mixing quicker. So that's why it sort of I adapted that format for the mix consultancy, that I can do that for anybody that wants it, basically. And yeah, it seems to work well. People learn quite a lot from it, so it's good.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, and we're going to put we'll put a link to it as well in all the bio on the thing. Yeah. It's great that you said that sort of critical listening, because you brought up, I think, 2 really fascinating things, like the emotional intelligence of being a producer and looking at people's art, but then the critical listening thing, because people will often, as you said, why is my mix not as good? Why doesn't it sound like that which I love? They know something's wrong, but they can't. I mean, maybe like, I can't get the bass to be loud enough, to be prominent, but without it being loud. You know, that's quite exactly. Often the thing is, where's the bass guitar gone? It's too loud, or like, okay, it's loud, but I can't hear the notes, all that kind of shit. Yeah. But then to give them that, well, this is it. So critical listening is
turn
like,
down 300, turn down 120, add 800.
And they're like, oh my God.
Try that.
Yeah, which, as you said, they'd never got it from YouTube, because it's not actually, this is what this track right now. It's how do I mix this song? There's someone on YouTube mixing it. Yeah. There you go, it's done. Yeah. But
that's great, yeah.
Yeah, their song isn't that song. Everything is different. Like every single % of that track that they've got now is totally different from that.
Yeah,
even if the genres are the same, the hi-hat sound will be different.
Yeah, and even if, to be honest, even if you're working on the same multi-track as somebody else's, the way you've brought it to where you get to at the end and go, well, that's as good as I can get, but I know it could be better. You know, it will be for different reasons. It'll always be for different reasons.
Dan, do you mix from the bottom up, or do you use like? Because obviously, you know, if you're working on a project and then you're mixing it, you've got your own reference, and you know, kind of know how the songs are. Yeah. And then now you've done the pre-production, done some engineering, you've done production. Now mixing it, it's kind of like a flow. And whereas when you get all the files sent through and you get your Spotify playlist and then your rough mix, do you then that first session, that first song, do you start from the bottom, or do you like obviously, you know, they've sent you put it into Pro Tools. This is kind of where the rough mix was. Do you take it from there, or do you strip it right back?
Kind of depends, really. It's sort of a bit of a judgment call you do, because you're listening to the rough mix and you're trying to work out how deep they went into the rough mix, you know, because if it was obviously just a faders up at the end of one day, then you probably don't want to take too much from that. It's a rough idea of balance, but that's what you're getting. Whereas if it's something that they've obviously laboured over, you're like, okay, I kind of need to start there and then push it from there. So if I found I was given a rough mix that I thought they've gone to town on this, so this is a clear signpost of where they want to be, I would start by trying to get to that. And then that's your step one, and then you go, right, where can I improve this from here? How can I make it more dynamic, more interesting, more weird, more whatever it is, you know, you think they're probably going to look for. So that would be the case if it were like that. But if not, it would be a start from the bottom and see what I can bring to this to make it interesting, you know. And I know I've probably got a bit of a wider remit then if they haven't gone too far themselves, which is a good and a bad thing, you know. You get to have a bit more fun with it, but you might go the wrong direction.
It's almost like if you take it's like you see kids in the bowling alley and they've got like the training thing, and it's gonna go and hit. It's gonna be like
it's gonna knock a few of them over at least.
Yeah, it's gonna knock a few over. Of course, if it's like, oh great, I can do what I like.
Yeah,
it's like the boundaries off, and you go, ooh, am I going? You know, is this going the wrong way? I mean, you might go, I fucking love this mix, and then send it back to the client. And they're like, are you insane?
Yeah. Well, that's a lovely start. Can we? Oh God!
I've just spent 48 hours on this. My God, you know.
Yeah.
So let's go to the obvious elephant in the room, the Grammy. Amy Winehouse, Mark Ronson. So how did you come into that?
That's an interesting bit of serendipity, actually, how that happened. I quite like that story, because what happened was, I was a big fan of T-Rex as a kid, right? So I'm working at Metropolis. I'm one of the in-house engineers. I'm reasonably senior, so get to say occasionally, I want to do that one, right? And I see Tony Visconti appears in the book.
Wow.
So I'm like, right, I'm doing that. I'm doing that. And he wants an engineer. Like, I'm definitely doing that. I'm engineering for Visconti. And it was for basically B-sides of Morrissey's Ringleader of the Tormentors album, right? So Morrissey's band for a few days, then a couple of days of tracking Morrissey, and then we started to do the mix. And me and Tony got on really well, and he wanted to mix it with me, but it was B-sides. They didn't really have the budget to mix it at Metropolis, and basically he got told to go back to New York and mix it in his own studio for less. Fair enough. So, but we did some rough mixes, and I had a good idea of what they wanted to sound. And what happened was Morrissey was into this kind of slightly odd vocal sound at the time. So Tony was explaining to me, saying, it's going to sound a bit weird, but he loves it, so let's go with it, which was fine. And then that happened. And then 3 months later, or thereabouts, I'm working with Mark, brand new session with this New York DJ that I hadn't heard with, and Amy, who I'd done a session a few years ago doing swear word replacement for some singles off Frank. So I knew her, and I didn't know him, but we did a couple of recording sessions, a bit of bass with Stuart Zender, Zender. Bit of bass with him, and some guitar with Mark, and we were working on his album at the same time, simultaneously the version album that he did with Amy's Back to Black. And there was a track called Stop Me If You Think You've Heard This One Before, which is the Smiths cover that was on Mark's album. And we got that to a certain place, and then he had to go off and DJ. It was like 7 o'clock at night or something, and there were 3 hours left on the clock. And he said, "Look, Dom, can you do a rough mix of this? We've got to send it to Morrissey for his approval." Like, I think there was a publishing thing where they didn't have to have his approval, but Mark didn't want it if he didn't have Morrissey's approval, because he loved Morrissey and his Smiths and stuff. So he said, "We need to get Morrissey's approval. So if you can do a rough mix of it. By the way, Morrissey's never approved a cover before. So good luck."
No pressure.
Yeah. And then he left. And I know it's not one of those things where could you pull an all-nighter? It's like, no, I had 3 hours, and then I was costing everybody overtime at £150 an hour, which wouldn't have been cool. I did have to get it done quickly. But then I thought, well, I know this strange vocal sound that I know Morrissey's into at the moment, so I'll do a rough mix of it. I'll put this vocal into this slightly odd vocal kind of area and see what happens. And so then, Morrissey approved it. Mark was really pleased. And so then I just that was my kind of in with Mark, really, I guess. And he liked the mix as well, so that obviously helped. So then for about 3 years, I was kind of his London engineer. If he came to London, and I think Vaughan was his LA one, I think, at the same period. When he came to London, I engineered his stuff. So there was Amy and him, and then that's where the Adele track came from. The track off Adele's first album, Cold Shoulder, was with him, and a few other things that he was doing at the time. He was busiest man in show business at the time anyway, so there was always stuff going on.
Oh, that's fabulous. And it's like, as you say, it's like sort of serendipity from just, well, there's Tony Visconti with Morrissey. This is this vocal sound. And then 3 months later, got to do it really quick. Shit. Oh, I know.
Here's a shortcut to something Morrissey likes.
Here's a shortcut. So just for anyone who could be, well, I'm interested, so I'll stop blathering. What was weird about the vocal sound? What was it?
I've been asked that before, and I don't quite remember. I think it was louder than you would normally have it over the mix, and with a certain reverb, like a short plate or a small room or something that you wouldn't particularly normally choose, that was also particularly prominent. So it was slightly odd like that. But the way I bring this story up with students a lot as well is there's obviously serendipity and there's a bit of luck involved, but the lesson to learn from it is it's like the footballer. If you're a striker for a football team, there's me using striker because I'm not a particular football fan, so I'm sure that's like a term that's not been used since the 70s. If you're forward, your job is to score goals, right? You may only be on the ball for 2 minutes in the game, right? But the reason why you score those goals is because you spend 88 minutes putting yourself in a position to score.
Nice.
And those 88 minutes are essentially wasted. But when you get those two, you're ready to go.
Yeah.
And it's the same when you're an engineer or if you're a session musician or any of those things. Most of the stuff that you work on will not lead to anything else, probably. But you don't know which ones do. So every time you step into a studio, you put yourself in a position to score. You make sure you're doing your absolute best work. Because that, that particular gig, it was like day 2 of working with Mark, with this New York DJ who seemed like a cool guy and was obviously making a cool record, but I'd worked on a lot of things that I thought were cool, that didn't get anywhere. As we all do. And that one happened to be the one that made that made a difference to my career. So yeah, it's a case of putting yourself in a position to score every time.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you said, on each thing, so to be ready to go. But it's also like as a session player as well. And I'm saying for anyone working on a thing, I've seen a lot of musicians, particularly younger ones, if it's not their turn to do something in the studio, they kind of lose interest in what's going on.
Right.
It's like, oh, we're doing the backing vocals now, I'm the drummer, I'm not really interested. That's okay if you're in the band, but if you're a session drummer and you come into a session and we can't do the drums yet, we're just finishing off this part of the song, is to pay attention to all of that, because then you're already several steps into the song already. So when you come to do your thing, you've already got your part in your head. You've planned a few options and you've got maybe some percussion ideas as well. If you're a drummer, you've got absolutely. And also I think just on a vibe level, it shows you care. Exactly.
You're excited to be there, and as I learned from my first work experience thing, just showing that you're excited to be there makes a difference.
Yeah, well, it's like Jeff Dugmore, who obviously you must know, the drummer. I mean, he's played on everything, but every time I'm with him in the studio, he's so enthusiastic about everything that's going on that even if inside he's thinking, everyone else who has never worked with him before thinking, we've got to call him again.
Yeah, he loves it. He loves what we're doing, even if he doesn't.
Even if he doesn't, which then gives all the new artist or the young band or whoever it might be, or even this producer or engineer who's never worked with them before, gives them a spur on as well. It's like, this is someone who's so experienced, thinks this is good.
Yeah, and that and which actually makes it better, because that enthusiasm is catching, and everybody puts another 10% in because they think we're doing something. This is great.
Yeah, and it allows people to be more creative because they're not scared of like, oh, maybe it's not any good. That thing where there's a really positive, it sounds a bit fluffy, but it's a relatively positive environment is being created. People are not afraid to say something and get shot down because the next few things they say, one might be the right, the one that everyone loves.
Well, that's nail on the head, really. It's that the positive atmosphere is a creative atmosphere, because if people are feeling good about themselves and good about the session, then they feel they can throw in ideas and not worry if it doesn't work, because everything's going well anyway, and not worry about people's opinions. And then you get to the good ideas. You know, it may not be the first one or two, but they will come if everybody feels like they can throw their ideas in, which is what I as I said at the beginning, I'm very happy to keep throwing ideas in, and happy to keep being wrong. And part of the reason why I'm happy to keep being wrong is I want everyone else to know they can be wrong too. You know what I mean? Exactly. It's great if we throw ideas and they're wrong, because that means, we're fishing out the good from the bad. We're working out what works and what doesn't, and we're still throwing ideas in. So it's like I heard a description which I think sums me up a little bit more than I want to, but Churchill says success was stumbling from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm, which I think is good on a macro and a micro scale. That could describe a day in the studio too.
Yeah, totally. Well, I was talking to a guy I'm doing some co-writing with. We were talking last night, and we were talking about co-writing some songs for an artist. And he was saying, well, I haven't got a theory about it or a plan. I just have a go.
Yeah.
Because he was talking about, if I send you some ideas, Damon, and you think they're shit, just tell me. And I said, likewise, because he hasn't been in bands before. Well, obviously, I've done, the whole band thing and many records with other people, what we've been talking about. But I love him just saying, I'm just having a go. And by his having a go, he's got away some big splits on big songs. But it's like, just like, well, I think this might be good. What do you think? And then, the first 9, what do you think? It's just like, but out of getting rid of those or working through them, something that probably might not have been thought about can come out as well.
Yeah. And as long as you're going through with, as the big man said, no loss of enthusiasm, then then you'll get to the gold.
That's so great. Right, I'm only a couple more things. This has been awesome. So tell us about the studio.
Sorry, say that again.
About the Flint barn. So what's the whole idea behind that?
So I used to share a room with Chris in Metropolis, and then we went out there. I mean, I moved out to Buckinghamshire. This is Oxfordshire, so I'm on the borders. And he was moving to Dorset. I think he lives now, doesn't he? So, it wasn't really useful being in Metropolis anymore. and so I was looking for a place for a while, and it's hard to find a place that's useful for a studio, because you sort of you need to be in a building that you're not obviously going to hear anybody else and all of that sort of stuff. And almost anywhere commercially that you want to rent is an office in an office building sort of thing, unless you're in a purpose-built studio, which is extremely rare, particularly in the countryside.
Yeah.
So what I did find was this building. It used to be a cabinet maker's, and it's just a detached brick-built building in a farm. So there's like a really sort of country home kind of big house nearby, and this is one of his buildings. So he just rents out a few of these, and next to me is the prop storage for Midsummer Murders. Yeah,
that's awesome.
So they're sort of popping every sort of once a year. There'll be like a 3-4 month stint where they'll be in and out with coffins and pub signs and all sorts of stuff like that. Because that all gets filmed around here. There's lots of sort of thatched cottages and stuff around here. Real Tolkien territory.
Yeah.
So I've been here for about 5 years, I guess, and it works out really well, because if you're to get a bit boring and techie on studios, the thing that's most expensive is soundproofing. Cutting out the sound from outside costs an absolute fortune. Yeah. But for me, it's like the occasional horse walks past. Like, there really isn't much sound to cut out, so I didn't have to do that. I just treated it so that it sounds good inside, and so it's worked out pretty well. So it's a reasonable space and sounds good, as I say. So I can do most of my stuff here. I go elsewhere to record drums and strings, but other than that, I can obviously do synths. Can record guitars, vocals, and everything else in here. So it's good.
That's awesome. I mean, I have a studio built in my garden, and kind of similar position, because I'm right in the middle of Monmouthshire in the countryside. Right. It's basically, it's not horses, it's sheep. That's kind of all I need to keep out, and it's not that hard to keep the sheep out, because basically they don't make any noise during the day. It's first thing in the morning and when it goes dark. And
really?
Yeah, and it's even then not loud anyway. So.
Right.
But I've got 2 border collies, so they tend to make most of the noise because they can see the sheep.
Of course. When they see the sheep, they go nuts,
So just a couple of things. Is there any piece of tech that you've got, whether it's analog, digital, like, plug-in, or, hard copy, so to speak, that you always reach for on a mix?
That's an interesting question. I don't know if there's any. I guess I have the things that I have quite a fair amount of outboard. I've got a reasonable amount of outboard, and they all are things that I love for reasons. So they end up being a first port of call, I guess. Yeah. That's as close as you get it. Like I've got DBX compressors, and I like what they do to bottom end. So often one of them will be on the bass, one will be on the kick drum, something like that. So there's things like that I'd go for, but that's really just, that's a starting position for anything, and then you use your ears and see if it's actually working in this situation, or if you have to go for something else. So so no, I don't know if there's anything that would have to be on everything I do, really. My latest purchase was a DW Fern stereo compressor, which sounds amazing. So that's on everything.
That's on everything now.
yeah. It's actually, this vocal mic is going through it. It's such overkill.
Perfect. Yes.
But yeah, it sounds great. So it's good.
All right.
So I'm afraid, I don't have a hard and fast answer to that, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, most people I've spoken to don't, but a few people I was talking to David Ehringer, and he's got the Roger Mayer analog sort of...
the kind of tape thing.
Yes, and he's like, I can put these on anything, and suddenly the world is fine.
Really?
Yeah.
I've heard a few people say that.
He was like...
Emre's a big fan of them as
well.
Yes,
he was talking about them as well. I spoke to Emre about a couple of months ago.
Maybe I should invest.
It's worth having a listen anyway.
Yeah, definitely worth having a listen. Yeah.
All right, the last one, this is the hardest one.
Okay.
Out of, I think you're number 20, as in, not ranked number 20, but in just the way
in order.
In order. half the people spoken to have gone, oh, for God's sake. And the other half have jumped straight in with answers. Okay. So, you're going to fall into either camp. Could you pick 3 things that you've worked on, and then we'll put links onto them on Amazon, that stand out for you for whatever reason? It's not like if an alien was to meet you, or if before they met you, this would sum you up. It doesn't have to be that comprehensive.
Okay. Yeah. Just something more personal than yeah. Okay, that is difficult. Well, one thing I can definitely go with. There's a guy called Lloyd Llewellyn. Proper Welsh name, an abundance of L's. He's an amazing singer-songwriter, and an EP's just come out that we've done. So if you look up Lloyd Llewellyn, there's an EP called Tell Me, and it's beautiful. He is fantastic. So definitely check that out. That's a new one. Personal things. I tell you what, I did an EP myself under the name 5 Pages, which 5 is a V. So V Pages. There's a track called In and Out, which my friend Becky, who goes under the name Saint Saviour, sang on for me, and she did such a beautiful job. And so that's always nice when you sort of collaborate with friends and then they lift what you do to such an extent. So that's a great one. And now I have to find a third. I'll tell you what I could do. As we were talking about the first thing that I produced, the Cy Connolly record, track called Hurt You, off the Cy Connolly record, which was recorded in Monmouthshire. One take, all the band singing and playing all at once.
Oh, wicked.
And if you check it out, it just shows how good Cy is, because his vocal's ludicrous, and he was playing guitar at the same time.
Yeah.
So that's a good one. There you go. There's 3.
I think that was a world record so far, actually, of the quickest.
Great.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Boom.
Yeah, off the top of my head as well. Nice.
I was talking to Cameron Craig, the head of the MPG, and he was like, oh, God. So then he's obviously in the studio, so he's got the old SSL screen up there, which has got his computer in there. So he's talking to me and he's typing, and he's obviously scrolling through his discography, and he's going, no, hang on.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, it's a bit of a horrible question for most people. They're like, oh, for God's sake. But that was fabulous. Yeah.
It's like when people say, who have you worked with, and you're desperately trying to think of names. You're like, okay, obviously Amy comes up with me because of the award and stuff, but then you're sort of, my wife's better at remembering than I am, to be honest. She's better.
Wicked. Where was the Cy Connolly one done? Was it done if it's in Monmouthshire, was it Monavalley, Rockfield?
Monavalley. Yeah, Monavalley.
Monavalley is a mile from here.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I mean, this house is flooded twice, and the River Mono is what floods. And then if I got in a canoe or maybe something more stable, I could sail down to Monnow Valley.
Hey, really?
Yeah,
nice.
yeah, it's fabulous.
Great room, great drum room. Really good.
Really good. Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Don Morley. Legend.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Let's give him a massive, and I'll give a solitary one here. Thanks, Don. That's been brilliant.